Good day, everyone. We are going to present our topic, the anatomy and physiology of the respiratory system. So, I am Ryan Jerome D. Posanso, together with my group mates, Christian Ace Bobis, Nika Angeline Bandiola, and Garlene Pearl Gonzalez, and our other group mates, um, Fran- Francis Michael Montealto, and Dafodil Lumagda. So, firstly, I am going to introduce to you the anatomy or the main parts of the respiratory system. So, first is the nose, which is the external organ that takes in air and warms, humidifies, and filters it before it reaches the lungs. So, next is the pharynx or the muscular tube that connects the nose, mouth, and larynx, allowing air to pass between them. So, third is the voice box located at the top of the trachea, responsible for producing sound and protecting the airway. Next is the trachea or the main airway, or also known as the windpipe, which carries air from the larynx to the lungs. Next is the bronchi, which is the branches of the trachea that enter the lungs, delivering air to the smaller bronchioles. So, lastly, is the lungs, or the spongy elastic organs located in the chest cavity, responsible for gas exchange, absorbing oxygen, and releasing carbon dioxide. Next is the physiology of the respiratory system. So, are its main functions. So, first is the regulation of blood pH levels. So, how does the respiratory system regulate blood pH level? As we can see here in the picture beside of it, so when blood pH is in the normal range, or the normal range of blood pH in our body is 7.35 to 7.45. So when homeostasis is disturbed, blood pH naturally increases. So this is going to be received um, via stimulus from to the uh, to the receptors and control centers, um, um, namely the medullary chemoreceptors, which detect an increase in blood pH level, and it causes a decrease in breathing. So during metabolic processes, cells produce CO2 as a waste product. This CO2 diffuses into the blood and is transported into the lungs, as we see here. So, in the lungs, CO2 readily diffuses from the blood into the alveoli. The process is facilitated by the large surface area of the alveoli and the thinness of the alveolar walls. So, as we exhale, CO2 is going to be expelled from the lungs and released into the environment. So the amount of CO2 in the blood directly affects the concentration of H2CO3 and um, hydrogen ions. So when CO2 levels rise, as we see here, um, more H2CO3 is formed, leading to an increase in hydrogen ions and decrease in blood pH. So, conversely, when CO2 levels decreases, here, as you see here, less H2CO3 is going to be formed. So H2CO3 is carbonic acid, so leading to a decrease in hydrogen ions and increase in blood pH. So other functions of the respiratory system includes voice production, olfaction, innate immunity, and respiration, which is the main process that the respiratory system um, carries out.
Hello everyone. My name is Nick Angeline Banjola. I'm here to talk about the nose. The nose, it consists of the external nose, the nasal cavity, and the external nose is one of the most prominent feature of our face. It gives shape to our appearance, meaning of prominent is that it stands out. So your nose is the part of your respiratory system that allows the air to enter your body, then filter debris, and warms and moistens the air. Your nose also gives you the sense of smell. Um, Most of the external nose is made up of hyaline cartilage. When we talk about hyaline cartilage, is that it also referred to as articular cartilage. It is slippery from the Greek word hyalos, which means shiny, so that um, it can flexibly. Although the bridge of the external nose consists of bone. There are anatomical names to each of the segment of the nose separated by the color. Um, we can see the root of the nose, the dorsum of the nose, the apex or tip of the nose, the wing of the nose which goes around the nostril. And under the skin, we can see the nasal bones, lateral nasal cartilages, accessory nasal cartilages, which is between the septal nasal cartilages and the major alar cartilage and the minor alar cartilage. So this is the frontal view of our nose, um, external nose, so we can see better. And ano, as you can observe, the nasal cavity is divided into two. So, which is the consists of the bony part and cartilaginous part. So this is called the septum. So the nasal septum is the bone and cartilage that divide the nose in the middle. Once it is crooked, it makes one of the passage smaller than the other. So if it's severe, breathing through the nose may be difficult, and sometimes this is treated with plastic surgery. So, next slide po. Asan ang nose? So, the nasal cavity. It is the inside of your nose. It is lined with a mucous membrane that helps keep your nose moist by making mucus so you won't get nosebleeds from a dry nose. There are also little hairs that help filter the air you breathe in, blocking dirt and dust from getting into your lungs. So, the cells that produce mucus are called goblet cells. They are a specialized type of epithelial cells that secrete mucins, which are significant components of the mucus. It helps the nose from drying up. So next slide. The nasal cavity is divided into two parts, namely the nasal cavity proper, which is lined by the respiratory epithelium, the nasal vestibule. Inside the vestibule are small hairs called vibrissae, which filter dust and other matter that are breathed in. So, the nasal cavity proper is divided by the nasal limenaceae. It is the ridge in the mucosa that separates the two it is used as a landmark. So the transition from skin to mucous membrane, the nasal vestibule is lined by tissue that contains hair. So the rest of the nasal cavity or nasal cavity has no hair. Next po. So we will not focus on the olfactory part of the respiratory of the nose. We'll, we will only talk about the um, respiratory part of the nasal cavity. The respiratory part of the nasal cavity is the region that functions to humidify, warm, filter, protect, and eliminate debris. So the nasal cavity has turbinates or conchae that are long, thin bones covered with tissue that can expand. Meatus's inferior to the concha are the pathways to airflow. So, palihog zoom sa top nga picture. As you can see, there are three turbinates or concha, namely the superior, middle, and inferior. They are arranged in a scroll-like pattern so that it maximizes the ability of the nasal cavity to humidify and warm up air. So, at the bottom picture, um, in between of those concha are the meatuses, which are the superior meatus, middle meatus, and inferior meatus. So, meatuses are spaces or opening for the sinuses. We will talk about that later. So, we have the paranasal sinuses. Um, the paranasal sinuses are air-filled spaces within the bone. So we have the maxillary sinuses, frontal sinuses, ethmoidal sinuses, and sphenoidal sinuses. Since the skull is pretty heavy and the sinuses are cavities relatively, they are thought to decrease the mass of the skull as well as helping in resonating the sound as we speak. They are lined with mucus with a lot of blood. They warm up the air and humidify it as the air goes further down our respiratory system. Lastly, the most important function of the sinuses is to produce mucus to keep the nose from drying out. Um, they also have the a drainage system.
So hello everyone, I will be discussing the pharynx. So what is pharynx? Pharynx, commonly called the throat, it is a passageway that extends from the base of the skull to the level of the sixth cervical vertebra. It serves both the respiratory and digestive systems by receiving air from the nasal cavity and air, food, and water from the oral cavity. So pharynx, it is a ring-like muscular tube in the middle of our neck, and it helps us to breathe and digest food. So we have the subdivisions of pharynx. Now we have the nasopharynx or the epipharynx, the oropharynx or the mesopharynx, and the laryngopharynx or also known as hypopharynx. So let's first discuss the nasopharynx. It is the top of our throat, connecting your nose to your respiratory system, and it contains adenoids, which help prevent infection. So, what is adenoids? It is a patch of lymphoid tissue that sits at the very back of the nasal passage, like tonsils. Adenoids help keep the body healthy by trapping harmful bacteria and viruses that we breathe in or swallow. Nakikita naman dito or napapansin naman natin dito sa definition no, ng ating adenoids which help prevent infections. So, second, we have the oropharynx or the mesopharynx. It is in the middle segment which connects to the mouth and lets air, food, and fluid through. So, yung kanina, yung nasopharynx is nasa top. Yung oropharynx naman is nasa middle ng ating throat. So, next we have the laryngopharynx or the hypopharynx. It refers to the point at which the pharynx divides anteriorly into the larynx and posteriorly into the esophagus. So, kung nakikita yun sa ating illustration na yung blue na part, yung nasa taas, yun yung nasopharynx. Yung green, which is nasa gitna, yun yung ating oropharynx. And yung nasa baba, yun yung laryngopharynx. So, ano yung importance ng subdivision, ano yung importance ng subdivisions of pharynx, no? The importance of subdivisions, it regulates how food moves to our esophagus and onto your digestive system, and how air moves to our lungs. So, yun yung importance ng subdivisions of pharynx. So, let's proceed sa pharyngeal isthmus. The isthmus is a constricted space formed by the soft palate, the palatopharyngeal arcs, and the posterior wall of the pharynx of the region. The isthmus is closed up by muscular action during swallowing. So in addition, the isthmus sometimes described as the passage that transitions between the oral cavity and pharynx. So let's proceed. Of course, our pharynx have the muscles that are arranged in two layers. What are they? The outer circular layers and the inner longitudinal layers. So let's discuss first the outer circular layers. We have the inferior constrictor muscle, the middle constrictor muscle, and the superior constrictor muscle. So what is inferior constrictor muscle? It is partially used during breathing and speech. It helps to keep the pharynx open, particularly during sleep. Yung ating middle constrictor muscle naman, it constricts and closes the pharynx during deglutition to propel the food bolus from the oropharynx downward to the esophagus. So ano yung bolus? No? It is the mass of substance na or yung mga food na kinakain natin or yung sinaswallow natin. For the superior constrictor muscle, this action facilitates the act of deglutition by pushing the bolus inferiorly into the esophagus and stomach. And let's proceed sa the inner longitudinal layers. So we have first the stylopharyngeus muscle. It is involved in elevating the pharynx and larynx. These movements are important during swallowing and speaking. So again, ang stylopharyngeus muscle, no, ang importance niya, it more on during when we are swallowing and when we are talking or speaking to everyone. Second is the palatopharyngeus muscle. It attaches superiorly to the hard palate and palatine upon neurosis and inferiorly to the lateral wall of the pharynx. Its function is to tense the soft palate and pull the pharyngeal wall superiorly, anteriorly, and medially during swallowing, effectively closing off the nasopharynx from the oropharynx. So that is the definition and the functions as well ng ating palatopharyngeus muscle. Last, we have the salpingopharyngeus muscle. It is known to raise the pharynx and larynx during deglutition or swallowing, and laterally draws the pharyngeal walls up. In addition, it opens the pharyngeal orifice of the pharyngotympanic tube during swallowing. So that is the salpingopharyngeus muscle. Again, the under sa inner longitudinal layers, we have the stylopharyngeus muscle, the palatopharyngeus muscle, and of course, the salpingopharyngeus muscle. Yung kanina naman, yung recap lang sa ating the outer circular layers, we have the inferior constrictor muscle, we have the middle constrictor muscle, superior constrictor muscle. Of course, from the word itself, superior, no, nasa taas siya. Middle, of course, nasa gitna, and yung inferior, nasa baba ng ating part ng ating throat. So that's the end of my part, and in conclusion, the pharynx serves as a common pathway for both and air facilitating the processes of swallowing and breathing. It is a vital component of the human anatomy, contributing to the complex and interconnected functions of the respiratory and digestive systems. Its muscular walls enable the coordinated movements necessary for the passage of food to the esophagus and the passage of air to the trachea. Understanding the anatomy and function of the pharynx is essential for appreciating its role maintaining the overall health and well-being of individuals. And that's the end of my presentation, and I hope you learned something. Thank you.
Hi everyone. So now I will be discussing the next part, which is the larynx. Do you ever wonder how we create sounds? My topic for today will focus on the part of the respiratory system that makes us unique from each other, which is the larynx. Larynx is commonly known as the voice box. It is located into the anterior neck. It is anterior to the cervical of the esophagus, and it is the link between the pharynx and the trachea. If you can see sa picture na provided, the larynx, it is a hollow tube that is in the middle of our neck. It links or it connects the pharynx and the trachea, which is the pharynx, which is nasa upper part niya, and ang trachea is nasa lower part niya. People might get confused between the pharynx and the larynx. However, there is a big difference between the pharynx and the larynx. While pharynx, both of them, tumatanggap sila ng air, like from outside to inside our body. Tumatanggap sila ng air. However, pharynx accepts food and anything that we swallow. However, larynx only accepts air. That is the big difference between the pharynx and the larynx. So during swallowing and the process of making sound, like what I am doing now, our larynx is mobile or gumagalaw. However, if it is at rest, the larynx sits at the level of the 3rd to 6th cervical vertebrae. Well, this is correct for our average adult male. For females and children, however, it tends to sit slightly higher. It tends to sit slightly higher than 3rd to 6th cervical vertebrae. Fun fact, the larynx tends to be larger in males because of its cartilage, one of its cartilages. The thyroid continues to grow until the age of 40, and it projects anteriorly to the midline or in the midline, forming as the Adam's apple. As you can see, compared sa woman anatomy and sa male na anatomy, ang male anatomy is, ang kanilang larynx is visibly bigger than woman, and merong Adam's apple. So what is the function, or what really is the larynx, or ano ba ito? Gaano siya ka-importante? Well, larynx protects our airways from choking. It regulates the flow of air into lungs, and it is the cause, or this is where the production of sound comes from, or the phonation. It protects our airways from choking. As I've mentioned earlier, pharynx and larynx differs because of that feature. While pharynx accepts food and air, larynx accepts air only. So, larynx protects our airways from choking. para hindi tayo mabulunan, para hindi tayo mahirapan. It also regulates the flow of air into lungs as it only accepts air, and obviously the phonation. It is the voice box as what we commonly know. For the anatomy, as you can see, this is the general anatomy of the larynx. As you can see, this is the laryngeal inlet, and it is the entrance from the pharynx to the larynx. So from the pharynx to the larynx, this is the main entrance, or dito talaga yung meeting place nila. Yung bukas, yung entrance to the larynx. As you can see, yung borders sa anterior, yung free edge of epiglottis, you can see the blue line. And sa lateral naman, yung arioepiglottic folds, which is yung green line. Yung posterior is the cuneiform tubercle, corniculate tubercles, and interarytenoid notch, which is nandito siya sa babang part. However, hindi siya highlighted, but nandito siya sa nasa babang part siya. Natin, nasa left side siya, and nasa baba banda. Next is the larynx spaces. We have 3 spaces, which is the vestibule, the ventricle, and the infraglottic cavity. As you can see, the vestibule sa picture, the vestibule is from the laryngeal inlet to vestibular folds. The second one is the ventricle, and it is between the vestibular folds and the vocal folds. And the third one is from inferior aspect of vocal folds to first tracheal rim. So we have the cartilages of the larynx. The larynx is composed of different cartilages, and we have 3 unpaired cartilages that is universally accepted, and meron din tayong 4 paired cartilages. So we have the epiglottis, the thyroid cartilage, and the cricoid cartilage. For the first unpaired cartilage, the epiglottis, it is the best known cartilage, and it has free edge. Kapag nakikita mo sa taas, andun yung, like, may free edge siya. It is leaf-shaped elastic cartilage, as you can see, highlighted ang nasa picture. And it sits posterior to the hyoid. So just take note that the hyoid bone is the brown part na nasa likod ng epiglottis. The epiglottis is anterior to the laryngeal inlet, allowing the passage of air. And the main function of epiglottis is to close off laryngeal inlet during swallowing and prevent food from entering the airways. So it prevents us from choking also. Second is the thyroid cartilage. It is the largest cartilage of the larynx, and it is formed by 2 thyroid laminae which fuse in the midline. The inferior 2/3 form the laryngeal prominence, or the Adam's apple. As I've mentioned earlier, the thyroid cartilage is, it grows until we're 40 or so. And it projects anteriorly to the midline, forming as the Adam's apple. So this is the cartilage that putting out sa men or sa male. Next is the cricoid cartilage. It is the complete ring of hyaline cartilage between the thyroid cartilage and the trachea. It can be divided into 2 parts, the anterior arc and the posterior lamina. The difference is yung anterior arc, it is curved, while ang posterior laminae is flattened. So next is we have the 4 paired cartilages of the larynx, which is the arytenoid cartilage, the corniculate cartilages, the cuneiform cartilage, and the trapezial cartilage. So first is the arytenoid cartilage. It is pyramidal in shape with 3 surfaces and a base which sits on the cricoid cartilage. And it has 2 projections, which is the vocal process and the muscular process. Ang vocal process niya is elongated sharp projection of the anterior surface, while ang muscular process is rounded and projects posterolaterally. Next is the corniculate cartilage. It sits on the top of the arytenoid cartilages. It is considered as minor cartilages, and it is conical in shape. As you can see in the picture, maliit lang siya. very small, it's tiny, and it is conical in shape. For the cuneiform cartilage, isa rin tong maliit na cartilage. It is tiny, elongated nodules of elastic cartilage located within the array epiglottic folds. As you can see naman sa picture rather, thin siya, pahaba, tapos nasa likod siya banda ng corniculate. Next is the last, which is the triticale cartilage, and it is the most controversial cartilage. Actually, it is not necessarily controversial, but there are a lot of sources na nagsasabing, or like, hindi siya kino-consider na cartilage. Kasi, it is only present in 33% of the population natin. And they are extremely variable. In summary, the larynx is commonly known as the voice box. Uh, it connects the trachea and the pharynx. Ang function niya is it protects our airways from choking. It regulates the flow of air into lungs, and it helps with the production of sounds or phonation. Ang larynx ay may 3 unpaired cartilages and may 4 paired cartilages, which is yung isa is usually hindi ko na-consider na paired cartilage. So that will be all. Thank you.
So next we have is the trachea. So the trachea is a hollow tube-like structure that runs from the larynx to the bronchi. So as you can see here, there are goblet cells. So goblet cells surround the interior of the trachea. So these goblet cells basically function as a line of immunity, since these cells fight off foreign debris and uh, substances that could possibly invade our lungs. So the trachea also regulates the temperature of incoming air in the lungs and warms and humidifies cold air and cools hot air by evaporation.
Okay, next would be the bronchi. After reading the book, in terms of simplicity, I've minimized the text into the following. In terms of bronchi division, the trachea divides into the left and right main bronchi, and another is lung connection. Each main bronchus connects to a lung, and the differences between the left versus right bronchi is that the left main bronchus is more horizontal due to the heart displacement, while the right main bronchus is wider, shorter, and more vertical. And any foreign object at risk objects entering the trachea are more likely to lodge in the right main bronchus. Furthermore, the extension to the lungs, the main bronchi, extends from the trachea to the lungs. As shown in the image, that is the trachea and stretches well inside the lungs. You can find the both the left and right bronchus. Next, the epithelial lining. Like the trachea, the main bronchi are lined with pseudosatisfied ciliated columnar epithelium, and the cartilage support is shaped as C-shaped pieces of cartilage that support the main bronchi. Now to the bronchioles. For the bronchioles, it is small. It is a the bronchioles are smaller air passages branching from the bronchi within the lungs. In terms of structure, it the lack of cartilage and are surrounded by smooth muscle. And similarly, the division of the bronchi, the main bronchi, further divides into bronchioles, as noticed in this microscopic version shown in the image. The function the area and then the airway. It conveys air deeper into the lungs. Moreover, the terminal bronchioles, the final branches before entering the respiratory zones, which is found there similarly to the microscopic image. The next slide, please. And lastly, the following, as I've identified in terms of the description of what is important to the bronchioles, is that it connects to the alveolar ducts and sacs participating in gas exchange, which will later be discussed by my fellow group member Ryan. And more, it is lined with epithelial or composed of simple cuboidal epithelium muscles. And it also contains mucous glands, which is absent. Forgive me, the mucus glands is absent in the bronchioles, which reduces the mucus production. And lastly, the role in airflow regulation. The smooth muscle allows the bronchioles to regulate airflow by contracting or relaxing. That is the end of my part.
So, hi everyone. My part, which is lungs. So, the lungs are the primary respiratory organs, each cone shaped with a base on the diaphragm and an apex 2.5 cm above the clavicle. So, next slide, please. Okay, so the right lung has three lobes. First is the superior lobe, the middle lobe, and lastly the inferior lobe. So as you can see in here, these are the three lobes. Okay, so the left lung has two lobes called the superior lobe and inferior lobe. So also there are nine bronchopulmonary segments in the left lung and 10 in the right lung. So each lobe is divided into bronchopulmonary segments separated from one another by connective tissue septa. But these separations are not visible as surface fissures because major blood vessels and bronchi do not cross the septa. Individual disease bronchopulmonary segments can be surgically removed, leaving the rest of the lung relatively intact. And okay, next slide, please. So, tracheobronchial tree. It consists of the main bronchi and many branches. Each main bronchus divides into lobar bronchi or secondary bronchi as they enter their respective lungs. So, as you can see in that image, um, there are main bronchi and mini branches, which is the main bronchus, which is the primary, and secondary is lobar bronchus, and the tertiary is segmental bronchus. So proceed. The lobar bronchi divide into segmental or tertiary bronchi, leading to bronchopulmonary segments. So this bronchi branch multiple times, eventually forming bronchioles. So furthermore, there are I furthermore sorry. Furthermore, um, alveoli are small air-filled chambers where air and blood interact, forming a succession of alveolar sacs connected to multiple alveoli. So there are about 300 million alveoli in the lungs. And so as you can see in the image, you can see that the alveoli is like parang small circles. So secondly, as lungs air passageways narrow, their wall structure shifts from cartilage to smooth muscle, with terminal bronchioles exhibiting a prominent smooth muscle layering with cartilage. Relaxation and contraction of the smooth muscle within the bronchi and bronchioles can change the diameter of the air passageways. Moreover, asthma attacks can reduce airflow due to contraction of smooth muscle in terminal bronchioles, potentially leading to death. In severe cases, air movement can be so restricted that death results. Fortunately, medications like albuterol promote smooth muscle relaxation. Okay, next slide, please. Respiratory membrane of the lungs is where gas exchange between the air and blood takes place. It is formed mainly by the walls of the alveoli and the surrounding capillaries. And the respiratory membrane consists of two layers of simple squamous epithelium and secreted alveolar fluid and separating spaces. So you can see at the image the two layers of simple squamous epithelium. So next slide, please. So recently, we talked about layers of simple squamous epithelium. So the individual layers are the following. First, a thin layer of alveolar fluid. Secondly, the alveolar epithelium composed of a single layer of cells, simple squamous epithelium. Third, the basement membrane of the alveolar epithelium. Fourth, a thin inters interstitial space. Fifth, the basement membrane of the capillary endothelium. Sixth, the capillary endothelium also composed. So, elastic fibers in alveoli allow for expansion and recoil during inspiration and expiration respectively. Surfactant secreted by secretory cells reduces alveoli recoil. Let's proceed to pleural cavities. The lungs are contained within the thoracic cavity. In addition, each lung is surrounded by a separate pleural. So when we talk about pleural, it is related to the ribs. Ribs. Okay. Each pleural cavity is lined with a serous membrane called the pleura. The pleura consists of a parietal and a visceral part. So, the pleura consists of a parietal and a visceral part. The parietal pleura lines the walls of the thorax, diaphragm, and mediastinum. The visceral pleura covers the surface of the lungs. The parietal pleura is continuous with the visceral pleura. So as you can see, the blue line is parietal pleura and the red line is the visceral pleura. Okay. The pleural fluid performs two functions. First, it acts as a lubricant, allowing the visceral and parietal pleurae to slide past each other as the lungs and thorax change shape during respiration. And secondly, it helps hold the pleural membranes together. Lastly is the lymphatic supply. The lungs have two lymphatic supplies, the superficial lymphatic vessels and the deep lymphatic vessels. So first is superficial lymphatic vessels. Superficial lymphatic vessels are deep to the visceral pleura. They drain lymph from the superficial lung tissue and the visceral pleura. And secondly, deep lymphatic vessels deep lymphatic vessels. The deep lymphatic vessels follow the bronchi. They drain lymph from the bronchi and associated connective tissues. The deep lymphatic vessels follow the bronchi. They drain lymph from the peak. As you can see at the image, you can see the deep lymphatic vessel and the superficial lymphatic vessel. Parang ano siya ang lymphatic vessel parang yung like thick na ano, thick part. ng parang root siya, parang ugat. At saka yung ano, yung superficial lymphatic vessel naman parang thin na ano, thin roots ng ano, tawag diyan, we call it ano, the terminal bronchiole na siya tawag diyan. So ayan, that's it and thank you for listening.
Now we are going to delve into the journey of air through the lungs when we breathe. So the main catalyst of breathing is basically when the brainstem sends signals to the diaphragm to move. The diaphragm is the diaphragm is the muscle under our lungs which pushes the lungs up and down and making it making us breathe. So when when brainstem signals the diaphragm to move, breathing basically originates from the brainstem, which I have said before, which consists of the medulla and the pons, as we can see here, the medulla and the pons, which which has outputs to which sends outputs to the respiratory muscles modulated by various sensory afferent inputs. So next, when the diaphragm then moves, the oxygen enters our mouth or nose. We cannot simultaneously breathe in our nose and mouth, so we just choose where we could breathe involuntarily or voluntarily. So, air then enters the nasal passages, which contain tiny hairs called cilia and mucus that help filter foreign particles and humidifies air. So, from the reporter earlier, uh, it she said that the nose contains tiny hairs or fibers which block off these foreign particles to so it won't enter our internal system. So next, air then air then passes into the pharynx. So the pharynx is the common passageway for both the respiratory and the digestive systems. Next is the larynx and the epiglottis. The larynx, also known as the voice box, sounds makes sounds whenever air passes through it. So that is called phonation. So the epiglottis is a flap of connective tissue that covers the larynx. So when we eat and when we swallow, the epiglottis uh, blocks off the passageway of the larynx so that we won't choke. Next is the trachea. So next, the air then passes through the trachea or the windpipe, which is a tube that connects the upper respiratory system to the lungs. So since the trachea extends to the bronchi, that is the next passageway. So the trachea then leads to the primary bronchi, each of which connects to a lung. The left main bronchus is more horizontal than the right main bronchus because it is displaced by the heart, as said by the reporter earlier. So lastly, the air stops at the bronchioles and alveoli. So the bronchioles branch out to tiny air sacs called alveoli. At the alveoli, oxygen diffuses into the capillaries and carbon dioxide diffuses into the alveoli and is expired or exhaled. So next is gas exchange. So differences in partial pressure are basically responsible for the exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide that occurs between the alveoli and the pulmonary capillaries and between the tissues and the tissue capillaries. So first is differences in partial pressure here. in the alveolus, and this is the pulmonary capillary. Um, the inspired air, as we can see here, is 160 grams of mercury. So, and the carbon dioxide is zero point 0.3 grams of mercury. So, when it travels through the alveolus, it gradually decreases because through its way, moisture grabs some from when it is inspired. So differences in the partial pressure makes it exchange. So next is when partial pressure and the partial pressures of oxygen and carbon dioxide equalizes as the result of the fusion. As you can see here, as you can see here, in the first step, it is not equalized. And in the next step, it is now equalized and it travels through the left side of the the left side of the heart, and the partial pressure of oxygen of blood in the pulmonary veins is less than in the pulmonary capillaries because of mixing with the oxygenated blood from veins, draining the bronchi and bronchioles. Then, due to the differences in partial pressure, oxygen diffuses out of the arterial ends of the tissue and carbon dioxide out of the tissue, as we can see here again. So, as a result of the diffusion at the venous ends of the tissue capillaries, the partial pressure of oxygen in the blood is equal to the partial pressure in the tissue, and the partial carbon dioxide in the blood is equal to the partial carbon dioxide in the tissue, and it is then expired through the right, and then the then the cycle repeats again and again. So next is the gas exchange in the tissues. So basically, oxygen-rich blood from the lungs travels through the arteries and arterioles here, and eventually reaching tiny capillaries in the tissue here. As you can see, the tissue cells here. So oxygen diffuses across the thin walls of the capillaries and into the surrounding tissue fluid, and cells absorb oxygen from the tissue fluid and use it for cellular respiration, releasing carbon dioxide as a waste product. Then, carbon dioxide rich blood travels through the venules and veins, eventually returning to the lungs to be released. Next is the gas exchange in the lungs. So, as we inhale, air travels through the nose or mouth, down the trachea, and into smaller tubes called the bronchi. So, these bronchi further divide into even smaller tubes called bronchioles, which ultimately end in tiny air sacs called the alveoli. Here, this is a miniature example of alveoli. So the alveoli are are they have extremely thin walls here, surrounded by the tiny blood vessels called capillaries here, and the walls of the alveoli and capillaries are only one cell thick, allowing for easy diffusion of gases. So oxygen from the air diffuses across the thin membrane here and into the red blood cells in the capillaries. And then, at the same time, carbon dioxide from the blood diffuses out of the red blood cells and into the alveoli to be exhaled out. So, finally, we exhale, and as we expel air from the lungs, uh, carrying as we expel air, it carries a waste product, which is the carbon dioxide, as I have said before. So next,
Hopefully, everyone's still actively listening. I'm speaking to the audience because if you are not, I promise you, hindi ka papasa. Just joking. The next subject would be gas transport in the blood. Based on the text that I've read from the book, I can summarize the following. Beginning with oxygen transport. Oxygen binding. About 98.5% of the oxygen transported in the blood combines with hemoglobin. In the process of oxygen transport in the blood, the majority of the oxygen, of course, 98.5%, binds to hemoglobin, a protein found in red blood cells. This binding occurs in the lungs, where the partial pressure of oxygen is relatively high. The hemoglobin has four heme groups, each with an iron atom at its core, which binds to the oxygen molecules, forming a reversible and stable compound known as oxyhemoglobin. Next would be dissolved oxygen. Approximately 1.5% of the oxygen remains dissolved in the plasma, while the majority, of course, binds to hemoglobin. About 1.5% of oxygen remains physically dissolved in the plasma of the blood. This small fraction is essential for maintaining the overall oxygen carrying capacity of the blood and ensures that a reserve of oxygen is available for tissues in cases of increased demand or reduced blood flow to specific areas. Next is oxyhemoglobin formation. When oxygen binds to the iron atoms in the heme groups of hemoglobin, the resulting compound is termed oxyhemoglobin. This formation is crucial for efficient oxygen transport, as oxyhemoglobin is stable and can carry oxygen from the lungs to the tissues throughout the body. The reversible nature of the binding allows hemoglobin to release oxygen where it is needed most. And binding dependency, or in the hemoglobin's ability to bind with the oxygen, is dependent on the partial pressure of oxygen. In the lungs, where oxygen concentration is high, excuse me, and partial oxygen is elevated, hemoglobin readily binds to oxygen. Conversely, in tissues with lower oxygen levels and reduced partial pressure of oxygen, hemoglobin releases its bound oxygen, facilitating the delivery of oxygen to cells engaged in metabolic activities such as cellular respiration. Next would be oxygen release. Following oxygen binding in the lungs, hemoglobin undergoes a conformational change that facilitates oxygen release in tissues with lower partial pressure of oxygen. This dynamic interaction ensures that the oxygen is unloaded where it is needed for cellular metabolism. The release of oxygen is a finely regulated process allowing for efficient adaptation to varying oxygen demands in different tissues and organs throughout the body. Next is tissue oxygenation. Once released from the hemoglobin, oxygen diffuses into the surrounding tissues, ensuring adequate oxygen supply for cellular respiration. This diffusion is crucial for sustaining the energy needs of cells, supporting the various physiological functions. Tissue oxygenation is a fundamental aspect of overall oxygen transport in the blood, connecting the respiratory and circulatory systems to the metabolic activities of individual cells. Of course, factors affecting the release are the low partial pressure of oxygen, high partial pressure of carbon dioxide, low pH, and high temperature increase oxygen release from oxyhemoglobin. Lastly is exercise impact, which during increased muscular activity as observed, several physiological changes occur that impact oxygen transport. This includes a decrease in partial oxygen, reduced pH, increased partial pressure of carbon dioxide, and increased pressure at temperature, leading to higher oxygen release up to 73% into skeletal muscles. Next subject would be carbon dioxide transport and blood pH. Based on the book, carbon dioxide transport, the carbon dioxide generated in the cells diffuses into the bloodstream, initiating the process of carbon dioxide transport from the tissues to the lungs for elimination. This movement is essential for maintaining a balance in the levels of carbon dioxide, a byproduct of cellular metabolism within the body. Next is transport mechanisms. Transported in three ways, which is 7% is dissolved in plasma, 23% is bound to blood proteins, mainly hemoglobin, and 70% as bicarbonate ions. Next is carbonic acid formation. Upon entering the bloodstream, the carbon dioxide reacts with water to form carbonic acid. This reaction is facilitated by the enzyme carbonic anhydrase, which is present in the red blood cells within tissue capillaries. The formation of the carbonic acid is crucial to the step in the conversion of the carbon dioxide to forms that can be effectively transported and eventually eliminated from the body. Moreover, enzyme action. In tissue capillaries, the carbonic anhydrase enzyme catalyzes the conversion of the carbon dioxide to hydrogen ions and bicarbonate ions. This enzymatic action enables the transformation of the carbon dioxide into more soluble forms, facilitating its transport in the bloodstream. Lung capillary process. Upon reaching the lung capillaries, the bicarbonate ions and the hydrogen ions combine to reform carbonic acid, which then breaks down into CO2 and water. This process is crucial for preparing the carbon dioxide for expulsion during expiration or completing the cycle of the CO2 transport from the tissues to the lungs. And lastly, pH regulation. In simplicity, when carbon dioxide affects the blood pH, increasing the carbon dioxide lowers the pH level in an acidic level as the hydrogen ions from the H2CO3 dissociation decreases the pH. And conversely, a decrease in the CO2 levels raises the blood pH in basic conditions, highlighting the intricate connection between CO2 transport and the maintenance of optimal blood pH levels. And I think that would be the end of the presentation. Next slide. So, thank you for listening. Okay. Good luck for the exams. You're going to need it kung gusto mo pasa.